Hey, my friends, Marshall Moore here with On Tap Credit Union, and we are back with Dave Sprague, continuing our conversation about retirement income planning and helping folks to answer the question, what do I need to do to make sure that I have a successful retirement, whatever that looks like for me. Specifically wanted to talk about risk in retirement. So, we talked last time about if we understand the general 4% rule, we can run some different scenarios and calculations, and those will basically give us a percentage chance of success. It's really hard to get that 100% because there's always a crazy, a black swan event that maybe we couldn't predict. Right. But if we can get to a very high percentage chance of success for ourselves, we can feel pretty darn good about the chances of success for retirement. What are some of the specific risk factors once we get into retirement that we would need to be looking out for and that contribute to some of those percentage chances of success?
So another great question, and it's one that all retirees and peer retirees deal with. Matter of fact, there are so many folks in retirement that still haven't taken the time to address these risks that is preventing them from living because they're worried about spending their money. And it can be tragic. If you don't spend the money early enough, then by the time you figure out you have enough money, you can't do what you wanted to do. And we don't get today back, right? So it's important. There are thousands of different types of risk out there. But what I've done over the years is they all to me fall under really 4 major risks. And if we can address each one of these risks, then I feel pretty good about our chances. I like where we're headed. The first risk is longevity risk, and that's simply just the risk of outliving your money. And this, there was a study recently released by Charles Schwab and another study that was published in the Wall Street Journal, and they said that up to 40% of retirees, this is their number one concern, is outliving their money. Well, there are strategies you can use to deal with that. We'll have conversations with the clients and members that come in. Is there longevity in your family? And once again, you could get deep into the rat hole with this. But one of the things, I was following one of the major economists at a speech at one time, and he said, just think about your longest living blood relative ever. They don't have to be alive right now. Think about them and add 3 years. And it gives you a ballpark, right? So if you have longevity in the family, then you need to structure your portfolio planning on maybe you go living past the 90-year-old mark or whatever. So that's risk number one. The second one is called sequence of return risk, or sometimes you'll hear it called sequential risk. This is just the risk of bad timing. So there's also something called the fragile decade, which is the 5 years before retirement and the 5 years after retirement. If you have a major shock to your plan during that 10-year period, studies have shown that it could have just shy of a 90% impact on success or failure.
Wow.
And here's how it works. Go back to 2022. So we've had great markets leading up to it. We got through the little blip in COVID, but 2022 was a down year for us, right? And we've had great years afterwards. If you were planning to retire at the beginning of 2022, and you did, and you had moved your assets into the retirement positioning, you probably were fine. But if you had the exact same scenario, but you'd end up retiring at the end of 2022, your assets could have dropped by 25 or 30%.
Right.
And now you have a tough decision to make. Do I retire and lower my quality of life more than I was planning on? Or do I cannibalize my portfolio and pull larger than that 4%?
Right.
And if you do that, now you introduce something called the arithmetic of loss. Now, I'll hit that real quick too. Let's say your investment or the market is worth $100 and you lose 50% of it in the market fluctuation. So now you're at 50. If the market recovers and goes up 50%, where are you at? You're at $75. You're not even back to whole yet, right? And then on top of that, let's say you're pulling 10% out to live on. So now you're at $40, and it goes up 50%. Now you're only at $60. So you can see how it just gets into a real dangerous spiral if you do that. So that's sequential risk. You need to adjust for that. Then you have inflation, an inflationary risk. Inflation is very, very real to us in normal everyday life. It's only 3 and 3.5% on average. But that means if you don't do anything, you'll lose a third of your purchasing power every 10 years. And that can be huge. Retiree inflation is even higher. Some would say twice as high as traditional inflation because of the goods and services that retirees tend to use. And that's typically the healthcare side of it. So you need to have something that will offset inflation in your plan. And then the final risk is what we call behavioral risk. Lots of times in behavioral risk, you think you're making bad decisions investment-wise, right? I zigged when I should have zagged, and that's true. But what we tend to find is if retirees are making a bad investment decision, lots of times it's because they're gotten too conservative. So that's part of it. Where I find it has the bigger impact, though, is your emotional behavior, or what are you going to do in retirement? What do I mean by that? Well, I think we talked about a little bit in the last segment, is people get to retirement, and study after study shows that they are afraid to spend money in retirement. So if you don't have a solid plan in place and you retire, you're sitting there going, you know what, maybe I'm not going to take that trip, or no, maybe I'm not going to set up that family reunion because I don't know what the market's going to do next year or in the next 10 years, heck, the next 30 years.
Right.
Well, the shame of that is that we don't get today back, and by the time you figure out that you do have enough money, you may not be able to do physically what you wanted to do. And I don't know where this came up, but somebody coined the go-go years, slow-go years, and then the no-go years. One friend of mine also added the uh-oh years at the end. But basically what that means is when you retire, traditional retirement, right, in the mid-60s, you're still healthy, you're still outgoing, still plenty of things. You mentioned your friends that like to ski quite a bit. Fantastic, do that. But if every year you kick that can down the road and you postpone something because you're not sure what the markets are going to do, and we always find reasons to worry about the market,
of course.
Right? There's always going to be something. You don't do that, well, guess what? You may not be able to do that when you're in your mid-70s.
Right.
So take advantage of that. So what we try to do when we're crafting a retirement strategy, first off, it's more important to marry that strategy, and we'll talk about strategies in the next segment, but it's important to marry that strategy with the personality of the client. Because if you have a risk taker and a very conservative strategy, they're not going to be happy.
Right.
Or if you have a very conservative person and a risk-based strategy, they're not going to be happy either. So what we try to do is marry those two together. Once again, if we can address the longevity risk, the sequence of return risk, the inflation risk, and finally the behavioral risk, what I've found is not only do you have a fiscally sound retirement, you have a retirement that is fulfilling, and that's the reason why you should retire, right? You're happy, you're doing things, you're active, you're fulfilled. It's so fun to see when people get to that point.
100%. And I'm already imagining now, envisioning, being retired, being able to support my family, to see friends, to be in my community. Perhaps I've taken a part-time job in a field that I enjoy much more than my long-term career. I love all of this.
Well, having known you, though, I don't think you're going to slow down a bit.
Well, once again, Dave, thank you so much. There's a quote that comes to mind when you talked about goals from James Clear, where he says, "We don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems." And that's where I'm really excited for this last segment to get into some ideas of the systems that folks can use and talk through with you to learn more about whether we are going to be okay in our retirements.
Perfect.